Sounds good.
You have the mic on?
Good morning. Just make sure my phone's off here. All right, well, thank you very much. I believe this morning we're going to be talking about facility rental and rental rates. I believe in your packet, you should have been provided 2 copies. One is our updated version of what we're proposing as our rental rate structure. And the other one is our current rental rate structure that you approved a few years ago. Let me kind of walk back a little bit and take you through our thinking in terms of how we developed our rates. So if you remember several months ago, we came before the board in a workshop and talked about our current rental rate structure. We knew that we had gone a full year now using Facilitron as our online rental reservation process. And so we had a lot more information about what were the rentals that were happening in the district, you know, what did it mean for the district. And so we had a lot of learning that went on over the course of the year. And we did a lot of listening too, and we still continue to do a lot of listening to our principals and our staff at school sites, who at the end of the day are boots on the ground with the rentals at their sites. And so took all of that in consideration, did a lot of listening, and knew we needed to do something with the rental rates. If we go back several years ago, you'll remember that our rental rate process was 100% decentralized. And so other than we had a common contract that would be signed by our renters across the district, every school site kind of handled all their rentals individually. Centrally, we did not know what was going on in terms of rentals, how many were out there, who was doing it, what was going on campuses. So Facilitron kind of brought all that together. But as we did that, we really started to enforce some of the board policy that was kind of not being enforced before because our process was so decentralized. And one of those specifically was when a rental happened, anything that had to do with the cost of utilities came to the district in terms of reimbursing the district for electrical, custodial cost, anything that was kind of overhead. Because our process was so decentralized, that did not always happen in the past, just because of a lot of miscommunication and things that were going on. So when we moved to Facilitron and we really structured the process and brought all that money back to the district where it was supposed to be going, schools said, gosh darn it, we're doing all this work and we're not able to keep any of the money at our school site where all the action's happening, where we got to do all the work in terms of making sure that our renters have what they need and they're scheduled correctly and all of those things. So there's a lot of frustration coming out of this year with our process. So having that lens on moving forward with the rental rates in front of you today, we try to do basically 3 things, I think, in listening to those conversations with our site administrators. One, provide flexibility. I think what they thought is we need some flexibility in the process. Again, from where we were, which was ultimate flexibility, to where we went, swing of the pendulum, to no flexibility. I think somewhere in the middle makes a lot of sense. And so design some rental rates that give us some flexibility so we know what's going on in our sites. We know what's going on with our renters, our frequent renters that are here all the time on campus that we've built relationships with. So build in some flexibility into the rates that allow us to make some decisions on our campuses that make some sense. So that's one, flexibility. 2, once we transitioned to Facilitron and all of the money was coming back to Central, schools had nothing left at the site. And so when they see the effort of those administrative assistants who have to talk to people on the phone, have to greet some of these groups, have to set things up, make sure everything is going okay, we need to be able to provide some reimbursement back to the school sites to account for that, so that there's something in it for them when they do these rentals. So that's number 2. And number 3 was to make sure that the rental rates, as they were structured last year, what did go back to a school site, that process was frankly delayed. And so what would happen is a rental would take place, and because we were learning our process at the same time of kind of rolling it out, sometimes those checks going back to a school site that were valid and should have gone back there took several months to get there. So there was a lot of frustration that if they did get to keep some money, they weren't getting it right away. And so those 3 things, providing flexibility in rates, making sure our rates were structured so that the school site could keep some money at their sites because it reflects what they're doing to support these rentals across the district. And then 3, making sure that our process got those checks to the school site in a timely manner. So if the rental happened last month, they were getting checks this month. So I think we've addressed those 3 things. So let me start with maybe on the back side of this with process for getting checks in place. Mitzi Corcoran and her team have really streamlined that process so that when checks come from Facilitron, they've got a checks and balances in place, and they pull reports down out of Facilitron rental. They validate what the costs were, what the reimbursement has been, and then they're committed to getting those checks out to a school site very, very quickly. So I think in terms of fixing that process, that's done and ready to go. So I feel very, very comfortable when we do start renting again, getting money to the school sites will be done in a timely manner, okay? On the front side of that are 2 things: flexibility in the rates, and then allowing schools to keep some money at their sites. And so that's what you see before you here today with this new rate structure. Our old rate structure was pretty simple. We charged an hourly rate, which basically 90% of that hourly rate all went to utilities. That all came back to the district. As we thought about what we would do to provide some flexibility for schools and to allow them to keep some of this money, we looked across, really state of Florida in terms of what's being done in other districts. And so what you see is kind of a accumulation of all of that coming together. First and foremost, what we did is I'm reading across the new rental rate structure. We actually added a few items to the rental rate itself. So let's start maybe with something that was already in there. If you look at the column at the center of the page, the hourly rate electric, that is the charge that comes back to the district. And so that's $48 an hour on the new rental rate structure. One of the things that we've been able to find with Facilitron is data. We know what's going on, we know what we're charging, and we know what we probably should be charging. And so what we felt like is we were charging $58 an hour for electricity. We feel like at this point, $48 would cover that cost. So we backed that cost down to reflect actually what we'll be using to support utilities. So we were able to get some flexibility there. Moving back all the way over to the first column on the left, we went ahead and charged an admin fee. Now what this is, it's an hourly admin fee added to the rate, and this is meant to support all of that pre-work that goes in from an administrative assistant and from a principal or an AP. Who's ever on the front side of these rentals has to spend quite a bit of time setting all this up. Even though Facilitron is screening the renters, there's still a lot, especially with a new renter, in terms of where do you go on campus, who's going to meet you, making sure that we've got all of those things in place. So that's meant to supplement that, and that would stay at the school site. So as you read across that top line, classroom rental, that's the top of the sheet there, we'd charge an admin fee of $5 per hour. The next one over to the right is a charge of $25 an hour. That's for the space. That's actual rental of the space. And so for a classroom that we have taken a look at what other districts are doing, we feel $25 an hour is a good representative charge of what makes some sense. That's also what would stay at the school site, okay? So if somebody rents a classroom space from us, they're going to be charged the 5 plus the 25 plus the 48. This is for a for-profit organization, and what would stay at the school site is basically the 5 plus the 25, or $30 an hour stays at the school site. And that really reflects, I think, a good coverage of the cost that's involved in that rental. The $48 an hour will come back to the school district and reimburse us for the utility rates. So what we've done here, I think, is reflective of the effort that's going in at school sites to be able to make these rentals happen. As you move down through, the other thing that we did is kind of by every space, we structured it the same, but we also added in something we realized that all districts typically do, is charge for things like chairs and tables. At the end of the day, if a renter comes in and uses our cafeteria tables or wants to rent some chairs to set up for a performance or something like that, that's wear and tear on those chairs. And the school site has to replace those. And so we want to be able to provide for charging for amenities and things like that. So you will see in each of the spaces, there are amenities in there that can be charged for. And so those charges would be also kept at the school site. So when a rental comes in, a school will be able to take a look at it. And remember, even using Facilitron, the principal or the APA, whoever's in charge of the rental at the site, has the ultimate authority to say, no, I don't really want to do this rental, right? They've got the power to do that, but they also have the ability to take a look at that rate structure and make some adjustments if they think is necessary. So if they've got a very large rental that's going to require a lot of effort and there's going to be a lot of setup and chairs and things of that nature, they can charge for those items. If they've got a much simpler rental, they don't have to charge for those items. So it provides some flexibility for school sites to really work with that renter and being able to justify the costs associated with that rental. That's what my first page is. So it says rental rates at the top and it's got multiple columns. Yeah. Yep. I can't, and I think that's the old one. So if you, yeah. Yes.
The only, I was wanted to confirm I was looking at it right from the rate of pay. And then I'll let you go through more. I just had questions about some of the other notes. There were 5 different provisions. The old one. And then the new one only has 2. So, but I'll let you get through those all.
Okay. So again, so as you're working through the sheet, you can see the different spaces. And again, on the left, you see is for-profit organizations. On the right is nonprofit organizations. And what we did to structure nonprofit is basically looked at the hourly rate charge for the space and subtracted $10 an hour from that rate. So to make it cheaper, more cost-effective for nonprofits renting our facilities. You will see we also adjusted some rates on some of our spaces. And we based that on what other people were doing around the state in terms of rentals of their spaces. And we really took a look at, if you go down to the second page, it's got the Venice Performing Arts Center, the VPAC. That's a rate that we did not determine. That's been determined really by market value and by the organization, by Pam, who rents that facility. You know, they have been and continue to be at $250 an hour, plus the electrical coming back to the district. We feel that represents the market value for performing arts centers. So as a result, what we've done is we've looked at all of our other VPACs, all of our other auditoriums, and we've adjusted our rates up a little bit to kind of reflect more what that market rate would carry across our district. So I think we're providing value to renters, but at the end of the day, we are saying, listen, we know there's a value in renting our facility, and we want to charge what's appropriate for that rental. We also added some spaces that weren't in here before. So for example, if you're renting a field, we didn't have locker rooms on our rental rate. So it was difficult for schools to seek reimbursement for renting a locker room. Now we've got those incorporated here. So we really tried to look to what were the spaces that we didn't have included and include them so that so we could charge those for appropriate for certain rentals. And again, a lot of this is based on some of the rentals, the information that's coming on a Facilitron, because we can see exactly what's being rented. We can see the comments in terms of what wasn't available, what was available. So it really provides some insight into what the rentals are going on out there and what we need to do with our rates to make them work.
Hold on a minute. Shirley.
Yes.
My issue comes back to, like what you said, the chairs, and even that administrative fee. I mean, I don't know what employee we have that only gets $5 an hour, but that seems a little low to me. And the chairs, are you talking about the chairs at the in the auditoriums? That's 20 cents a piece for the wear and tear on those chairs. I know what it costs when you try to rent the Opera House or the Van Wezel. I mean, and this is, or even the Robarts. This is a lot less than that. And, I just see these like Sun events that come in and they rent this and then you buy a ticket for X amount. Or I remember there was those Chinese dancers and those tickets were really expensive. And, they're getting these facilities for very little cost. And I just want to make sure that we're recovering our costs in these when they're selling, and they've got ticket prices. I don't know if you thought about having a cost per ticket, but I'm just concerned about the wear and tear on the seats in the auditoriums.
Sure. And not only seats in auditoriums, but in anything that's being used on campuses, right? That's always a concern as we move forward. Here's what I would say. That's certainly a valid argument. I think we've made a jump here in terms of what we're going to be charging renters across our district. I think it is reflective of what we know based on Facilitron rentals that are covering our costs. But this is something we can look at every year. And so Dr. Asplin and I talked about this the other day, and I said, we made, I feel, some significant changes here. Again, allowing the flexibility, the cost to stay at the school site, and reflecting more of what it's costing us to have these rentals. I'd say we get another year under our belt and we kind of see how things went. We talk to our customers, our principals, and say, okay, what's the new rental rate structure looking like? Are we covering costs? And so this is something certainly we can bring back next year and look at again if we think we need to make some additional adjustments for items like that. I'd say we looked at this with the lens of our customer, our principal being the primary focus, but I'd be lying to you if I didn't think about the calls from our public as they try to rent and they're seeing their rates go up. And so I think, to me, this is a good first step. Let's see how things go for a year, and then if we feel like we're still too low, we can make it an additional adjustment. I just want to make sure we're also looking at the community too, and because we know those calls will come in as rates go up. So there is an increase of rates for renters, and point well taken, but I think if we can get a good additional year of data under our belt, we can maybe make those changes
And
ongoing.
Is there something in the contract, say, like if a seat gets torn or dirtied or something, that they would be cleaning them? Or
Yeah, so Facilitron, one of the things that's very, very nice is that everything with the rental stays with that rental ticket. And so as it comes in and it's processed through the approvers and gets to the point that the rental's complete, we can go in and we can add additional costs to that rental or charges to that rental if, for example, there was 6 hours of custodial time on there, but then when the custodians came in, it took 12 to clean it because it was a disaster. We can add time back to that rental and add the cost. If there's broken chairs or whatever that happens, we can add the cost of that at the backside of the rental. So that we do have the capability of doing that, absolutely. We have the capability of blocking a renter. So if we get somebody that comes in and just doesn't care about our facilities, destroys our property, we can block them from renting altogether. So yes, we have that ability to do those things if our initial estimate does not cover the cost of that rental for some particular reason.
Thank you.
Jane?
Well, in looking at this Facilitron initially and then hearing from some of the schools, I thought maybe this was a bit overkill. If we had 50 schools or something like that, I thought, yeah, this is a no-brainer. But we don't. But I know, being involved as I am on the board at the Venice Performing Arts Center, we look at those things carefully and like working with Facilitron very much. Other schools, maybe not as much, but I think some of the changes that you've mentioned may help. And I think we have to look at our fees. You take Riverview High School, for example, starting in probably early October in a normal year, which this is not, we would have the auditorium used every night through December, and that is quite common. So, and the other thing that I wanted to mention is that our custodial staff is really eager for us to get back to business, because they're not the ones that are saying we don't want to work. They're saying, hey, we can use this overtime. This is always something good for us. So I found that, that may not be the case. I thought, the custodial staff doesn't want us, not quite. That's not what I'm hearing. But I would just say, let's look at this for the next year, like you said, and see where we are. I've heard people say, hey, we could take somebody that's, got a Microsoft background and put something together we could use throughout the district, a database, calendaring and whatnot. And I don't really have the information to make that determination, but I would like us to look at it more closely in about a year. Any idea when we'll be doing some partial pod repopulating of our auditoriums and so forth?
Well, I think that may be part of the discussion that we're going to have here today.
Okay.
Certainly, I think the timing is really good so that, we adopt the rental rate structure. And then as we open, we're under the new rental rate structure, and we don't have to switch midstream. So I know there are a lot of facilities who are getting a lot of calls about rentals and things of that nature. So that's part of certainly the discussion here this morning and what the board prefers for that opening schedule.
Brendan?
Yes. So thank you, Mr. Dumas. Appreciate the information. Two things. We do need to discuss when we think we should begin to open for rentals. And then if you could also just remind us the expense that Facilitron charges us for their services, just so that everybody knows what we are paying them.
Yeah, so that's a great point. I had it in my packet. I forgot to mention. Thank you, Dr. Asplund. So Facilitron, if you remember a few years ago, we signed that contract. It's no cost to us. That is a free service to us, the website and the management service of rentals. But what they do is they charge the renter, and so it's a sliding scale. So it's anywhere from, on a smaller rental, from 6% to 12%. So it just depends on how the price of the rental. The higher the price of the rental, the lower percentage they charge. But they charge that directly to the renter. So that's part of the business model we really like with this company, is that we don't pay for the service, our renters do.
Eric?
I wouldn't necessarily say that we don't pay for that, because obviously we could have charged more because they're charging the clients more. I mean, if we charge 60, but they're able to get it for 70, then what we're losing is the $10 difference. So it does cost us something. So do you have any idea how much Facilitron charges all the renters?
So it's a sliding scale depending on...
I know, not the percentage, the dollar amount.
So for last year, I don't have it with me, but I could provide it.
One of my important constituents wanted to know about, piggybacking on what Ms. Goodwin said, possibly bringing it in-house if they're charging, an exorbitant amount of money. I mean, depending on how much money it is. If it's $30,000, it's a no-brainer. But if it's $200,000, then the question is it $200,000 you can do it with one person? Is it $200,000 it would take 10 people? So knowing how much money Facilitron charges is helpful. But again, I don't necessarily say that doesn't cost us money, because if you bought it in-house and you charge the same rate Facilitron charged, then you would get that extra money. So.
But I remember before we had Facilitron, what was going on. We had no idea who was charging what. Special deals were being made at the schools. We had no accountability. And that is one of the reasons that we brought Facilitron in, because one school could charge $100 and another charge $50, and we didn't always see the $100 or the $50.
The school saw the $100 or $50. The money stayed with the school, and the money was used at the school. So the question is when this board is already weighed on it philosophically, do you want money spent at the school level, or do you want the money spent at the administration level? And the board has already spoken, and we wanted the money spent at the administrative level. Something the board has already decided that. On the policy, I didn't see anything underlined on this. Is this pretty much staying the same?
Let's see, on the policy for school board rentals?
Yes.
Yeah, we didn't make any changes to that.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yep.
So let me finish, Jordy. Would you talk to us about what occurred before Facilitron, so that some of the board members who were not on the board then have a better understanding of why we went to Facilitron?
Sure. So before Facilitron, we had a district rental agreement that we would put out, and so all schools had access to that rental agreement. And so if I was a renter, I would call a particular school that I wanted to rent at, and I would negotiate with the principal or with the AP, whoever was working that arrangement with me, what that rental would look like. And then the school staff would do all of that work. They would bring the renter on, they'd collect the checks and all of that stuff, make sure the insurance was in place, make sure that if they were a nonprofit, their nonprofit status was correct. So that was all done at the school site. And then at the end of the rental, they would send a check into finance to cover the cost of the utilities in some cases. In other cases, that didn't happen just because there was not a lot of training on that. So as an administrator changes from one year to the next, nobody's training on that policy, and so that kind of gets lost over time. So our process was very decentralized with a lot of work going on school staff. Let me tell you a little bit about the other thing that Facilitron not only does is provide the website, and if you had a chance to take a look at it, there's pictures of all our rental spaces. A renter can do everything online. But the other thing they add to the value of the package is they are also available 24/7. So if you are somebody who wants to rent but you can't use the website, you got questions, you call them. They'll facilitate that rental process with you. They also collect all the documents from the renters, like the insurance documents, and make sure they meet our criteria. They upload all of them. And then if I'm a nonprofit, they verify my nonprofit status. So at the point when I'm ready to rent from a particular school site, all of that background work has been done by Facilitron. So in terms of some of that processing, that's all been taking off school sites, and now it's just a matter of scheduling and getting things going. But Facilitron does all of that for us. So it's not just advertising who we are and what we rent in our rental rates. It's all of that background work with the renters also that they do for us.
And I think also what was key is the fact that they are accountable to the funds, that the funds go to the school and the funds also come back to the district for the district costs.
Yeah, so
and that wasn't always happening.
Correct. And so what they do every month is there are reports in there that tell us about all the rentals that have happened. It breaks down all the costs, the charges that were associated with those rentals. That goes to finance, Mitzi's team. They run through all of that and verify that everything's done correctly, make sure the sales tax is being paid, all of that stuff. And then they will be sending those checks out to the school site. So everything comes to finance. They vet it all out, do an audit on it, and then it goes out to the school sites.
Shirley?
Well, I'd like to thank you for putting all this together, and I, for one, have no qualms about Facilitron doing this. I do not want to bring this back in. It's a lot of work, and it would be a lot of work across all our schools, and I think it's better to have it centralized, not only for our district, but for the renters too. And I think our facilities are being used a lot more even because it is so easy to go through and use this, and that's what we have to think of too. The best way that we can get our facilities to be able to use by the public that basically are paying for these with their taxes too. So I thank you for this, and I'm supportive of what you've done. Thank you.
Bridget?
Thank you. Yeah, I think that, I appreciate the going back to the drawing board and responding to administrators, because I do recognize that was a source of revenue. It also is closer to their community, and there's a lot of value there as well. But I would agree, while I do believe our school-based administrators are very knowledgeable and multifaceted, there's an efficiency with Facilitron that from even just a risk management standpoint makes me feel more comfortable. The one thing is, as we move forward and evaluate it, like you said, year over year, as we increase the rates, and again, trying to minimize the administrative burden, but something that was mentioned, I think more of the smaller nonprofits, those are additional incurred costs. This current economic time, nonprofits are being hit even, and they haven't been able to put things on for months on end. Not sure if there's any kind of discount for a local nonprofit, if we could do or not, or if that adds an abundance of administration.
Well, here's what I would say, Ms. Ziegler, is that we work very closely with everybody. And so we have, having some flexibility into this rate structure allows us to work with people a little bit. So let me give you an example. So we have a lot of small renters who may come in right at the end of the day. They provide some kind of an aftercare at our particular sites with some kind of an activity. In many cases, for example, one of our biggest costs is running HVAC. So if we are already running or we're already doing something on campus, a lot of times we'll work with those renters because, again, they're not adding costs to our facility. And so I would say that we are already providing some of that flexibility where we can that makes some sense because, at the end of the day, we've heard you, we don't want to overcharge for our rentals. So I think a lot of work goes in behind the scenes to help out with some of those renters where it can and makes some sense.
Okay, because I was going to say, locally, their tax base is what allows us to have these facilities in the first place. But when we're doing those exceptions, is that done at the central level at Facilitron, or is that at the school level?
Most times that's at the school level because those are the details that a school administrator will know. A lot of times facility services, Don Hampton, who's here, will get involved in those. So for example, if you look at a classroom rental, we have the charge for one classroom, but if you are renting and we try and steer you to a group of classrooms that are on the same air handler, we can cut you a rate on the rest of the classroom, so you're not paying that prime rate for every classroom you're renting. So those are the types of things that we can do. Typically, it's at the school site or in conjunction with facility services trying to work all that out.
Okay, and we're doing that kind of, I guess, the streamline element almost flips on its head when I'm glad we're able to work with them. This is kind of the cap of the cost, and then...
Yes,
okay.
and then we work from there. That's exactly right. That's a great way to describe it. This is kind of the cap of the cost.
Okay.
And where it makes some sense that we can back that down because we're not actually expending that, then we try to do that.
Okay.
We don't want to overcharge for a rental, certainly.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Before we move on, do we have to have a discussion about when we would like to begin renting?
Yes, ma'am. So Jody, did you have any particular date? I think we were kind of leaving it up to, kind of up in the air. We wanted to hear what you had to say about what you thought maybe a good date would be from each of you, and based on some of the things that you know. And Ms. Goodwin, I know you brought up the information about the custodial staff and so on and so forth, how they feel. So we really wanted to get some feedback from you on when you think a good starting date would be, and also knowing that there are other events just that have nothing to do with the school system that are out in the community. You know, when are they beginning? When are the city managers beginning to start events and so on and so forth? And should we align with that?
Well, could you tell us, before we begin, could you tell us what you know about when the cities on the, I think that would be a baseline to start, when the cities and the counties and
Yes.
the arts organization?
In the last meeting that I had with city managers, they were really speaking about the beginning of the new year. So in January, that they would actually start with festivals and so on and so forth. You know, is that exactly what they're going to do? I'm not sure. They were still kind of waiting to see how things were going with the virus and the comfort of folks and what they need to do. So, but it sounded like after listening to all of them and listening to their conversations, they are not really ready to open and start anything until January.
Thank you. Shirley?
I think it would depend upon what the facility is and what steps they're going to be taking to make sure that that they're doing some social distancing and they're requiring masks and things like that. Because I think that's the most important issue. Because I know you can fill up the performing arts hall, but that's not what we want. But renting a field is something totally different. So I think it would probably depend upon the event and where it is. Because I know, like the cheer jam that they do after school, they do that outside, and they're spaced apart anyway. So I would have no problem with that. And I don't know that we can go down the list right now and do it, but I would think that it would depend upon the function. I don't want to just cut everybody off right now, but I don't know that I want to open it up to everyone either, especially the performing arts halls. And I don't know what's going to be going on in the classroom, but surely you can, have a classroom that you've got 10 people in, and you can, and I don't know who would be the one that would be policing that.
And if I could say one other thing as you begin to speak about this, don't mean to jump in, but just so that you know, just as a school system is concerned, as you know, we've started athletics and we're operating at 25% capacity in the stands at this point in time. And then we've also talked to our arts folks and let them know that we can start events in our auditoriums as well. So at 25% capacity. So they are moving forward with that. However, that is a school event. It's something that we very much control. Obviously, it's not an outside event, coming in, something that we don't control as much. But I just wanted you to be aware of that, because I know some folks point to that as well, that we've already sort of opened up and started doing a lot of things with our students, which is definitely appropriate for where we're at. But that could come into your decision as well.
Eric?
I'm going to come from a little selfish point of view, volleyball. I mean, they're Venice in regionals now, and so they're in there playing volleyball, and then a lot of those girls are on Venetian Club, and so to tell them, hey, and that starts in December. They had tryouts in August. So something that's engulfed my life right now. And so you have the kids playing volleyball now for this school, and then it's pretty much the same group of kids playing in the club ball. So I don't see how it's okay for them to play and practice, on a Venice Indians, and then when it comes to Venetian Bay, why they wouldn't be able to do the same thing. It's in the same place, as long as they're following the same mandates. Obviously, it'd be for all the schools, but I'm just using one for ease of reference. Why you would allow them to play volleyball in the gym, but then when they go to do club ball in December, it just makes sense that it would be a continuation. I don't understand why it would work for one group and not the other. I mean, if it's safe enough for the kids to play volleyball, and there's more people in the stands during districts and regional for the school than there is at a club. At a club game, it's just the parents. And I'm not even talking about games. The games don't start, the games are tournaments, so the games aren't even played at Venice. So we're just talking about practices. So there's nobody in the stands for club ball. The tournaments are in, there's one in Orlando this weekend. I'm not going, Christina's. But it's not, we're not even talking about games or people in the stands. We're just talking about kids practicing, which they're already doing. So it seems to me that if people are using the gym and they're following the same protocols that we are currently doing, that should be fine. If it's not, then why are we having our students following that same protocol? If you don't think it's safe for the kids to play in club level, then gosh darn it, why are we letting the kids play at the game of the sports level? So that's my feeling. And the club ball practicing doesn't start again until December. So from my point of view, I agree. Auditorium is different. We have people sitting next to each other. But for situational, when you're talking about things like volleyball, with already playing now, there's really no club football. But to me, it's comparable. It's apples to apples. It's the same group of kids, and they're practicing, and they're not doing games.
Jane?
Well, I'm going to speak on the level of the Performing Arts Center. Last spring at the VPAC, we developed a very, you know about this, Jody. I mean, I don't know anybody that has a more sophisticated scheme of pods to bring students or persons in at 25% or 20% or whatever, so that you have 2 people or 3 people or 4 people or 6 people, and how you would segregate those individually within the confines of seating. And we've done some very interesting analysis and have that all in hand. However, you know, we do, this time of year is the busiest time of year for Performing Arts Center, and also for some of our, like Riverview and others that, you know, have the dance recitals and all those other things which are really important to kids and really important to our community. So this is the most probably the busiest time of the year for Performing Arts Center between now and the end of the year for any of our auditoriums. And I don't know that we are ready, and I don't know that we're ready to do anything before January. I am concerned about our numbers ticking up. We still have, 9% positive in this county this past weekend in our pediatric report. Our numbers for COVID in the county have gone up to almost 5%. With the number that I checked yesterday. So and what I'm hearing is that we're going into the worst period. So I think that we better hold off from doing anything, but I really would like to see us do some things. Eric is right with his, that's a smaller situation and probably easier to handle than it would be in a auditorium or whatever, but I'd like to see it sooner rather than later. I think our schools would, I think our employees would, and I think our community would. So I don't know that we know what's appropriate. It's probably not ready yet. Probably not ready till the first of the year. I wouldn't be surprised by that. But when we're ready, we do have some very sophisticated plans in place, which we can share with other schools. If any of you know Mike Hartley, you know what a brain and what a mind he has, and so I would just say that we'd be happy to work with others.
I'd just like to talk about, since I heard you all, I would just like to talk about what our community is doing. I know that the ballet is doing virtual. The shows are being broadcast virtually. West Coast Black Theater is doing virtual. So they are not opening up. They are afraid to open. So we're thinking about opening up our schools when our community is not opening up the community for events. So I think we need to think about that as well before we make this decision. Bridget?
Thank you. I'm curious, especially as we go through the rental rates, and all the points my fellow board members made are absolutely relevant. There's so many different facilities, and within that there are different parameters you would consider depending on what would be taking place. My question, I guess, and whether or not this can be answered, but what are our local or school-based administrators? What's their sentiment? Because that's also from, again, and I think this will go hand in hand when we go to the next policy discussion, but is, I know there's a significant concern with staff and when you're bringing in things, and so there's a couple layers of, one, it's communication, but I would start with the simplest question is, have we gotten feedback from our local school-based administrators as to what their comfort level is?
We have, and I would think I would call it varied. I think it kind of varies across the district in terms of who's thinking what. Certainly from some of the PAC center managers, like the Hartleys, they've been talking with me now for several months, and they've got very comprehensive plans in place should we open. You've got other administrators who are supporting some rentals and have called me and said, Jody, this person's approached me, can we open up for this? There's always, I think, still a concern, especially directly after school with some of the rentals that happen on campuses, that we don't get 2 and 3 and 4 rentals on the campus at the same time. And so now the one rental isn't the problem, but now you've got 2 and 3 and 4 going on. So, excuse me. So again, I think it's varied, and I think maybe a phased approach, kind of what you're discussing here, maybe makes some sense for us to provide everybody that level of comfort. So I don't know that there's one clear, hey, we need to do this or we need to do this. We're kind of everybody's in a little different place, I feel.
And that's understandable. And then I guess my second question as we evaluate that is, who's determining what protocols? We think, I think back to, we can have this discussion, but why I asked at the school-based level is they're closer to their employees, they're closer to their community. There's a variety of different outside, organizations that can come in and provide a benefit. So then, wanting to allow them that flexibility, however, trying to alleviate some of the administrative burdens of who's determining what those protocols are. They have enough on their plate as it is right now. Is that something where, Mrs. Goodwin mentioned what VPAC has done and has, a great model. Is that something that, as the board discusses what our comfort level is from a macro level, and then that could be something that is really managed a little bit more closely at the school level within those parameters. And I would assume their contract would have to change as well, such that they're following whatever those parameters are. Has that been addressed at all?
Yeah, so 2 things. One, let me recognize Don Hampton, who's actually done all the work on this, so I hate to be taking credit for it, so Don, thank you. We actually, and Don actually added to our contract this year a piece of the contract that has to deal specifically with COVID. So that's been added to say you got to follow the rules. We can add the rules as we need them. So if we say, we're going to make sure everybody has to have masks if you're renting, we can have that in there. So that can be flexible in terms of kind of, when they click and say, yes, we're renting, this is what they got to abide by. So we can do that. And I think Dr. Asplin jump in, but as we moved in terms of allowing students to do some student performances and things like that, as a cabinet, we met and had a lot of lengthy discussion about what does that look like. And so when students are allowed to come in and do a performance or something like that, masks are being worn, social distancing in the audience, those types of things were guidance that we gave through our executive directors to all the school sites. So I think we certainly can do that if we want to, as we open those rentals and say, we're going to open on a limited basis and here's what that needs to look like.
Understood. And one final question is, as we evaluate that, is, as I recall having discussion before, was particularly around our custodial staff. So ensuring that whatever the outside entity is coming in and utilizing our custodial staff, obviously being sensitive to their bandwidth and also ensuring that there's enough of them, there's not any kind of quarantine issues or outbreak or for what have you, lack of a better term, that they are able to respond to their core goal of making sure that the school is clean. So how is that? That should, I would assume, be part of the discussion. Can you give us an update on what that looks like?
Sure. So I would say the custodial staffing ebbs and flows. I feel that, I don't want to speak for Don, but I feel like we feel a little better where we are today versus where we were, when we first started school and we had a couple custodial teams quarantined. Having said that, I think that every night it's a struggle to make sure we are cleaning all of our spaces appropriately, and we are, one contact tracing away from losing a custodial staff as it's happened in the past. So we're very cautiously optimistic we can do that at this point. I think one of the things that Facilitron leads to kind of facilitate this process is that there's approval process in place so we can make sure that the facility manager is seeing the rentals that are being approved, and if they've got a problem problem with staffing that, they could raise a flag at that time and say, hey, we need to maybe take a look at this. So I think the mechanisms are in place to provide that information and that feedback as we get closer to those events, with a cautious note of it could change tomorrow if we get an exclusionary case come in and we've got to put a couple custodial teams out. That would put us in a situation where we're again worried about staffing just to clean nightly. Some of the things that Don and his team have done, we've reached out to aides, drivers, transportation, food service, to other people who will get on our list for subbing if we need it, and so they can call on those people additionally, and those people are working for us where we need them. So again, I think we're better than where we used to be, but again, sometimes it's day to day.
Okay. I mean, and just navigating, again, from the historical standpoint of when we get there, let's say we were renting it out, a school just chooses such, they sell those tickets, and then, I mean, this is the world we live in, proceed with caution. I don't know, there's no crystal ball, I hear that, but I don't know if there's a contingency of, I certainly want our staff to have the ability to get the extra work should they want it, but I also need to make sure that we're, as you said, not monitoring it so that they are able to respond. So in that event, would an outside organization be able to fulfill that so that we're not compromising, again, the cleanliness or the process for regular school hours? So, I mean, there's a lot of questions, but my question, I guess, to the board is, at what point, and probably wanting to allow some flexibility, it depended on what it is, as we've done with even some of our athletics,
So before I call on Shirley, I would like to remind us that it's now 12:15, and we need to be through here by 1 o'clock. And we still have the face mask. So Shirley?
I think we need to follow what the schools are doing. If the schools aren't using their auditoriums, we surely shouldn't be renting them. But if the schools have room, I mean, because I know they've got after-school programs, if they have room for them and they would want them and deal with them, I would say let the schools decide if they want to do that or not. Because I don't think it works the same for all schools. Like middle schools and high schools, they don't have to worry about after-school kids and child care. Maybe they can open up. So I think maybe allowing the schools to make some of these decisions, but definitely not open the performing arts halls until we're opening those auditoriums. I mean, if we're not letting our students in for programs, we surely shouldn't be letting the public in. And even to set a date for it when the numbers are starting to climb, not only in our county, but the state, and they're seeing record numbers again across the country. I would even be hesitant about saying, well, let's start making appointments for after January 1st, because things could change. And so if things change, I mean, I would definitely want to be able to do that. So I would say we don't open our auditoriums until we do it for our students. And, maybe you can take reservations, but, they sell their tickets at their own discretion, because if we're not going to open for our kids, we shouldn't be opening them for the public.
Well, I do believe at this point in time, we are opening for our students. I know we have a production coming up, Phantasmic, is that what it's called?
Booker High School.
At the high school, Booker High School.
But that's going to be really limited.
And I know that's October the 30th, that evening. And then we go into November, and there's some other small events. I think what might be a good idea is if we take some of this information back with us to the principals meeting and talk through some of these changes with the principals, also get a feel for their comfort level as far as opening their own buildings and so forth for outside events. I think we need to get that information, and then I can share that with you and get a better feel for what we want to do moving forward. And then as far as these rental rates increasing, I would assume we would need to place this on a board packet for our either our next board meeting or our November 17th board meeting for approval on the increases on these rates. November 10th, I'm sorry. So we will do that. We'll talk with the principals. We'll find out comfort level there. I'll share that with you, and then we'll move this forward for a vote on the 10th.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much for your input.
Thank you. Now let's move on to number 2, the face mask discussion.
Yes, so as you know, we have our face mask policy that we will be voting upon during the board meeting today. And Mr. Hardy, I know he is here to help us with any policy questions that might come up. So at this point, though, I just wanted to turn it over to the board to see if there's any discussion that you might have regarding masks.
Jane?
I think we've talked this to death, and I think the newspaper articles that have been in the paper in the last couple of weeks have concerned our teachers. I probably think we've gotten 1,000 emails and phone calls, texts from teachers and teachers' families. I have no desire to make any changes to this policy. I have no desire to discuss it any further. I think what we do is go forward. Now, if things change, we can always change it. But this morning, 2 schools in Duval County and a private school in Duval County have been closed. And, COVID cases are up. And I have talked to the union and talked to other people in the community, and we would lose our teachers day one if we do not have a mandatory mask guideline. In fact, some of the teachers are very upset that we've got the 5 minutes in there every hour. They say, we know how to do this. We don't need you to tell us that, but yet we want you to make the decision on the mask. We don't want to make it at the local level. So I would say I have a grandchild in the school district, and she's fine with wearing a mask. I run into 4 and 5 years old children at the car wash, at the grocery store, and have talked to some of our schools, and the children are doing fine if the parents are doing fine. So I really think this is much ado about it's done.
Shirley?
I've received several emails saying, well, have you had experts in here? Have you talked to child psychologists? And we received an email from one yesterday, and I'd like to share parts of that with not so much you all receive it, but with the public. Dear members, as you meet this week to discuss the plans for the remainder of the year, I urge you to consider our children first. Their health and safety are number one, and we should be making whatever sacrifices we can to ensure this is so. I have previously written to you prior to the start of the school year. I have a PhD in clinical psychology and a master's in public health and epidemiology. I've lived in Sarasota, and they've got kids. And as you prepare to vote on the final issue of the agenda tomorrow regarding continuing the mask requirements, I urge you to acknowledge this. It is easy to become complacent with preventive behaviors in a situation in which you don't feel imminent danger. Know that the rate of infection in schools has been controlled and mediated by the measures that have been put in place that prevent the spread of infections, of which mask wearing is a quintessential component. Do not take the necessary risk by loosening the measures that have proven themselves to be effective. Masks are the single most effective tool individuals have against the spread of the disease, supported by years and years of credible research. He's listed several links, but the one is for the new and emerging respiratory infections, no pharmaceutical interventions may be available. Masks may therefore play an important role in reducing transmission. Another one from the Lancelot was the mask use could result in large reductions in the infection. Another one from the journals is cloth does not stop isolated virins. However, most virins transmissions occur via larger particles and secretions. The point is that not some particles can penetrate, but that some particles may be stopped, particularly in an outward direction. Masks are both significantly reduce the number of microorganisms and expelled by volunteers. And then he talks about some of the issues that people have said, well, it's going to cause tooth decay. He said, my wife is a dentist. She wears the 95s most of the day. She has no problems with it, and lists some of the other things, but urges us to pay attention to the health of the children and the teachers and those involved and follow the science. And if anybody wants, I would share this email and those links with them. I'm sure this gentleman wouldn't mind. but I would take his name off of it so he doesn't get bombarded by
know
others.
about it.
We are following science. We are following what doctors of epidemiology are saying, and he's also a psychologist. We need to do what's right, because I feel that most of the children with their masks feel safer with the mask. They say if you take the mask off, that is what's going to make them fearful of coming to school. So I think we need to keep it.
Bridget?
Thank you. No, so I've had extensive conversations with everyone on this, and I, again, want to thank all the members of the public that have emailed their opinions in and had their voice heard. And I recognize there's a lot of different elements that we need to look at this. One of my biggest concerns, as I've said before, is that I believe in this particular, as a policymaking board, and recognizing that things can change, it would be ideal to identify a goal as to where we would want to go. Now, in conversations with Department of Health and medical experts, I understand there's not one specified metric. There's a number of different things to look at, but I think just as it was at the very beginning, making sure that we put out as much information as we possibly can in real time so that each person can make informed decisions is a really, really critical part of this circumstance. I'd like to see us evaluate it on a monthly basis to see where we're at, but prior to that, get a sense of a goalpost of where we would like to see to be headed. You know, if I go back to, and I've said this before, the goalpost has changed. A number of things initially when we did lockdown, again, it was a novel virus. We don't know very much. We didn't have much data on it, so extreme measures were taken in the essence to slow the spread and not overrun our hospitals. Since then, the concern, understandably so, with the, having never been in a situation quite like this before, there were lots of calls to not open up schools. I mean, very, very loud calls to not open up schools because terrible things were going to happen. And there were different rates recommended that we shouldn't even consider it if it's 10%, and then it moved down to 5%. So overall, it's, again, a frustrating component that the goalpost continually moves. So as a policymaker, the health and safety and emotional well-being of our staff and our students is the priority, as is our academics, and making sure that we have a quality academic learning environment for our students and that all have that access. So I believe it's incumbent upon us to continually evaluate this, but have a sense of where do we want to go? Because in reality, if we're seeing positivity rate increase, but we aren't at the same time seeing hospitalizations or the mortality rate increase, then we're having a different conversation. What is it that we're trying to solve, just to make sure that no one ever gets this? And I recognize that I have people within my family that have autoimmune and high risk. And so those are decisions that we make as a family. But I also concern that our goal from a policymaking standpoint is multifaceted. And so we need to be cognizant of the unforeseen consequences of continuously saying we're going to full steam ahead without regularly evaluating it and putting some kind of area or goal or metric where we'd like to see where we could potentially start to remove this. I can tell you, as an elementary school mother, my kids can put them on for the grocery store. I don't really take them to the grocery store that much, but I'm saying that's a short stint of time. And yes, kids are resilient, and it has a lot to do with the energy and positivity and the approach that the families put out there as to what that, how that impacts that. But I do believe that in perpetuity is not an ideal circumstance at all. So much though, I can understand the frustration from some families that are sending over and just feeling like this is not this environment that they want their children to learn. It's our responsibility as a public institution to provide a quality education to all of them, and remote is not a viable option. We're seeing it reported all over the country that it is not a viable option for many, if not most. So I believe it is paramount that we as a policymaking board, if this continues, that we have the mandate across the board as is written, that we include a provision where at least every workshop, we get an update as to our current rates of infection at the school district. Again, I'm looking at our dashboard, and we have 43,000, well, I guess a little bit less of that in person, so we're around like 35,000, and not including charter schools, that are in our district. And I am very impressed with the numbers, and I recognize that many can say it is the mitigation tools that have allowed this from outbreaking, and I can understand that, but I also say we have to look at this at a macro level, because there is an unforeseen consequence that we may not, and I hope that's not the case, but we don't know. Never been in a situation like this, and so I believe it's our responsibility to hold us accountable, to evaluate it on a monthly basis and see, is this truly necessary any longer? And I think in time, God willing, that we also can inform what our positivity rates are, what the hospitalization, so the severity of if someone does get sick or is tested positive, how that correlates to the risk factors. So that's, I believe, lacking, and I recognize as I touch my mask here, I recognize from a policy standpoint that we advertise and we don't want to go back and forth and change it, because there's a protocol in which we have to do that, advertise it for 30 days, et cetera. But I believe without any kind of accountability measure, that we as a board understand we're listening to the concerns. We recognize on both sides the value and comfort it's bringing, and the concerns that if we're not going to hold ourselves accountable and evaluate this and set a defined goal, we can change that again if there's some unknown element that comes out. But I've not heard one person on this board, absent Mr. Robinson, I know you've asked this before, is we should be working with our Department of Health and our medical experts to ask them, when is it okay to lift the mask mandate? What is our goal? Does anyone, I just am curious if any other board members that have been in support of this are willing to cite where they'd like to see us go, or the willingness of the evaluation with a goal in mind.
Right now, I can answer you. Right now, I would not want us to evaluate every month. I know one of the things that the teachers are talking about is they're tired of not knowing. They're tired of being worried that at the end of a month, we're going to take away masks. They want some solid, they like the fact that it's going to be to June, that the whole year, that they will be under this mask policy, because then they don't have to worry about it, because they are worried. And a lot of them are thinking of taking retirement because we keep bringing it back up for discussion. And they are not happy with that. Eric?
There's a lot to unpack there, Ms. Ziegler. And I feel for you about the metrics issue. The problem I have is every time I've asked, and I've asked repeatedly, it's not an answer that I think is appropriate to put into policy. And I also think that none of us up here have doctorates, so we shouldn't be determining. It's tough for us to determine what the metrics should be. We should be applying upon those people, but unfortunately, they're not. I would say that they're not giving us. They're dodging the question, so to speak, and I don't like that, and it is frustrating. And I think a lot of this, what you're talking about, was out of frustration from what you said. Ms. Zucker made an excellent point about wanting a certain level of certainty, and so that clearly has value. When I got my master's, I pretty much only learned like 5 things, but one of the things I learned was that stress is caused by uncertainty. And the uncertainty of the mask policy clearly causes stress for everybody, whether you're pro or con, just the uncertainty causes stress. But I want to go back to something that I think Ms. Goodwin and Ms. Ziegler actually agreed on one issue. And I think it's not about coming up and deciding whether you're going to have masks or not, but I don't think it's entirely unreasonable to, especially during this crisis, the number one thing engulfing our society right now is COVID in the pandemic. And so having a period of time for the superintendent to give an update on COVID, which I think was one of the things you were asking for, That doesn't necessarily mean that you change the mask policy, but it helps to determine other things like opening up gymnasiums. It permutates not just to this one issue. This COVID thing is, I don't understand a region of our educational system that it's not touching. And so I think that it would be helpful for the board, even when I'm off, for the new board members, to get regular updates on this is where we stand, this is where we're having a COVID, and maybe possibly letting the board know these are the things that are being affected because of COVID. 1 month you may talk about how what's happened with the AP1 scores because of COVID. You may talk about what's happened with enrollment because of COVID, what's happening with mental health of the students because of COVID. There's multiple things to be discussed, and I think making a minor change where the superintendent gives a monthly update about COVID and related issues, I don't see how that creates any downside whatsoever, and it creates nothing but upside. I see nothing for that. I mean, I would like to see this be unanimous and be 5-0, and I think we can get there if we just add a little tweak of allowing the superintendent to give a monthly update. If people don't want to hear a monthly update, that's up to them. But I'm one board member, and so I think it's helpful for not just me, but for the incoming board to get monthly updates about what's going on with COVID and how it's affecting our school district. Thank you.
Jane?
I think a monthly update. I do a daily update, okay? I study this every week. I take the pediatric report and take it off of the Department of Health. So it's on my mind all the time, as it is on everyone on this board. Has nothing to do with this policy. We have shopped this policy. We had agreed on it. We tweaked it so that you and Eric would agree and vote 5-0. We sent it off for advertising. We brought it back. We can do that and have a monthly update or a twice-a-month update. I'm fine with having it every time we meet. But it has nothing to do with this policy. This policy needs to go as it is. And again, here we have division on the school board. We can't agree on something, send it off to be advertised, bring it back, and approve it. It should be on the consent agenda today. I don't even know who put it in new business. We've taken all these things off consent and put those into new business today, many of which don't need to be in new business. But this one really needs to go. And we need to get on with it. And then we need to, every time we meet, have a COVID update. I agree. That's important. I don't know of any reason why we wouldn't do that. But this is just another stalling tactic, and I really find it egregious that we're doing this again.
Shirley?
I agree that we need to give some security and comfort to our teachers and our parents and our community by passing this policy. Although I don't believe there's as much disagreement because I think we all agree we need, and I think the public needs to have that. The only disagreement I have, I don't want to see it every month. I want to see it at every meeting during the superintendent's report. Tell us what the state number, I would really care about the state, but more importantly, the county, and not just the overall numbers, but the pediatric numbers. And I want to know what's happening in our schools. We can all look at that dashboard, but it doesn't always give you the whole picture. Like, I was concerned where the school where my daughter teaches, they had 4 cases. And I'm like, you had 4 cases in your school? And they says, well, that was a remote case, and they were all in one family, and they were remote. They never came into the school. And I'm like, oh, well, and then I look at what's happening at Riverview High School, and that's alarming. I mean, at some point, if something happens where it gets worse there, I'm glad to see that the numbers are low of the people who are actually infected. We have high numbers of quarantines, but the infection rates, which I get comfort. It doesn't seem like the infections are spreading within the school. And I think that's been helpful. And I think if Dr. Brennan could give not only so much us, but the public, because it isn't just us talking to each other, it's the school district talking to the public. And I think we need to tell the public, because they don't know all these numbers, and the numbers that are out there get skewed. We need to know what the positivity rate, what the gross numbers are of the people who are getting infected. And is that going up or down? And, you know, are we hitting records again? Are we going through a second or third wave? We need to know that. And I think there's agreement on the board. We all want to know that. But we all want to give our teachers the comfort of knowing that, you know, we've got your back. We want you to continue to work in our schools. We want to let the parents know that we are going to continue this. I mean, when our numbers get, and everyone can see what those numbers are, but as long as we're getting cases in our schools, we need to keep the policy. And we set that out. We've got the policy, and I think that's a good message we can send our community. And I don't know that there's so much division on the board. I think we all agree. We want to give that security to our teachers and to our parents and to our staff and our families. It's something we need, but we all do want to see. But I listened to some of these, Dr. Fossey and some of these, it may not be at the end of the school year. Hopefully, if people continue to wear their masks, they continue to follow these other protocols, our numbers will hopefully go down in our schools. I'm shocked that we have higher numbers than Manatee, but I'm glad we have lower numbers than others. But we need to keep the mask policy, and I think, we can do that with a strong message this afternoon when we vote on this, and then hear from Dr. Asplin if, in fact, he's agreeable to giving us this information at every meeting.
Bridget, you're next, but Art would like to speak. Could you yield to Art?
I just wanted to offer a suggestion based on what I'm hearing, which of course you all are very capable of choosing not to listen to. But it sounds to me like there really are 2 points of agreement here. One is to vote in favor of the mask policy, to continue it. The second is to direct the superintendent to provide you with periodic updates. And those are related but different. So my suggestion to you would be, when we get to the board meeting, because obviously we're just talking about it now, someone can move to direct the superintendent. That sounds harsher than it is, because I'm sure he doesn't have a problem doing it, but direct the superintendent to bring you an update on COVID situation. You can make it as specific or general as you want, on a periodic basis, whether that's every board meeting, every workshop. On one hand, then there is comfort from the board that you'll be getting that information on a regular basis, whatever that basis is, every 2 weeks or every month. And then also, you can vote to approve the policy, which I'm also hearing people want to do, so that there's no break in the policy at all. So your policy will always be in existence, and you will also be getting the information that you want in a timely fashion, whether it's every meeting or every workshop. So that's just my suggestion, that you can have 2 motions to accomplish what I think you all want to do.
I don't think we need a motion. I think all we need to do is to tell Dr. Brennan that we want updates. I mean, I don't see why it has to be a motion. He's gotten the message, he understands, and I'm sure that we will have an update at every, do you want it at every board meeting or once a month? Every board meeting? Okay. So it's done. We don't have to worry about it. Bridget?
Thank you. No. And let me clarify some things. And I think, Mr. Robinson, thank you. The uncertainty piece, I think, is pivotal from an operational standpoint. And I understand that the uncertainty, especially with COVID, has caused a lot of angst. So I'm not dismissing that. And I think no matter whether you're in support of masks or not, any potential uncertainty is causing a lot more unnecessary stress. So I also recognize procedurally, we don't want to continually change our policy but my point was, I think there are a number of elements, and to what Mr. Robinson even said, that to have this update, one, we can evaluate what's happening in our county and our state and our schools, and it helps guide decision-making not only on the masks, but as you mentioned, rental agreements. I would love to see how many students, from a remote learning standpoint, what that trend has been from a return and vice versa, as well as we start to really hone in on the academics and see what any behavioral impacts, and so make those correlations. Those, I think, are a responsibility of ours, and to evaluate. So this is not in one silo. We're only looking at positivity rate, and that's why we have masks. No, there's a lot of things that we need to evaluate in concurrently with that. And lastly, I think, ironically, we're an educational institution. What better way to inform the public as having these regular updates? I think if we can have them frequently as each time we meet, I would absolutely support that. I do believe that we can't identify that metric. I would love to have subject matter experts continue to join us occasionally. I don't know that they can make necessarily every meeting, but as we do address these items, and to Mr. Robinson's point, yes, I don't know that any of us can. I was merely highlighting the points that these percentages and rates and goals have continually changed, making it very difficult for us as policymakers to make sound decisions. So I will leave it at that. But I do believe that this is a critical component of, as we move forward, we have to be evaluating it, and we have to do it publicly to understand the vast impact and the benefit.
Okay, a final comment from me. I happen to know that some of our COVID cases that are popping up in the schools are not because of the schools. The kids are going to parties after school and the evenings. And that is what's causing a lot of this angst in our high schools. It's not the schools that's doing it. They are bringing it in. And I would put the onus on the parents to help make sure those kids stay safe by not allowing them to go to parties, by allowing them to do social distancing, by allowing them to wear masks if they are going to parties. That has been a subject for us. That we're getting blamed for the mask, needing to keep the mask on, when we need the parents' help. And they're well aware of what their students are doing. So I don't see we have a problem because we have to enforce the mask policy. But if we want those numbers to go down, then the parents need to join us in helping us keep their kids safe. And that's all I'll say.
All right. Well, thank you very much. It's really good information to have, and I will certainly supply updates whenever we meet, at least at every board meeting or board workshop, to let you know what's going on there with the COVID. One thing I do want to mention is today when we have our board meeting, we did invite Chuck Henry and Mike Drennan from the Department of Health and Dr. Gordillo, and I think we invited another doctor as well that we're waiting to see if not going to make it. So those three will be with us during the board meeting. I just wanted to make sure you knew about that.
Good. Okay. We're adjourned.
Oh, we going to do comments or no?
Just the read?
No. We have lunch over there. Do you want to do comments? I thought you'd comment. Aren't you commented out?
I'll save it. I just think that, it'd be good to get past the masks so that we can get down to what really is important, which is how are we educating our kids? I mean, how is it working with this remote learning? What are the problems our schools are having? If we can get an update of what's happening in our elementary or middle or high schools. I mean, because I think even though we've got this COVID thing going, I mean, there's some great things going on in our schools. Dr. Asplin shows us on his weekly updates. And that's what we need to be looking at. We need to be focusing on what we're doing in our schools and how we're helping to educate our kids and how we need to adjust that. And, we've got a legislative session coming up. What are going to be our priorities? What's the funding going to be looking like? There's a lot of things we need to start looking at and addressing, hopefully now that we put the masks behind us.